Corporations really do have all the luck. No other entity in this country could commit the kinds of crimes that corporations do and walk away without ever seeing the inside of a jail cell. There are two separate justice systems in this country, and the one for average citizens is far more harsh than the one that corporations live under. And I have Howard Nations with me now to talk about this. So Howard, Senator Elizabeth Warren comes out with this great new report a couple weeks ago, Rigged Justice. I can't think of a more appropriate title for what's happening in the country today, Rigged Justice. The title says it all. I mean, that is exactly what's happening when you compare average citizens to corporate America. Lay this out for us.
Well, the sad fact is that equal justice under law is a cruel joke because of the inequitable enforcement and punishment of criminals. You hear the political mantra of, I'm going to be tough on crime, tough on crime. What does that really mean, especially when Republican politicians say it? It means tough on crime, it means tough on indigent defendants. It means tough on drug dealers, burglars, murderers, routine felons, as it should be. But it also means especially tough on black youth who are an easy target. What it does not mean is tough on corporate crime, tough on corporate executives who cheat and steal and destroy the jobs and life savings of citizens, as we saw in 2008, and then ravage the U.S. Treasury at taxpayers' expense. Corporate criminals proceed with impunity to rob America without fear of criminal prosecution.
And I think what's interesting, needs to be pointed out is we say things like this a lot, but people have to understand this isn't just a talking point. It's not a hyperbole of, corporate America, they're so horrible, they're breaking the law left and right. I mean, this report lays out exactly what is happening. And it's true. I mean, you can go to almost any industry and find criminals sitting at the top. They've paid fines. They write most of those fines off in their taxes year to year, so they're screwing consumers twice. But, I mean, we really have criminals out there running some of the biggest organizations, some of the biggest industries in America today.
Well, the mythical purpose of law enforcement is to punish wrongdoers, deter future criminality, and in some cases to aid the victims. In a fair society, enforcement rules would be applied equally to both individuals and corporations accused of crime. Reality is that a black youth who possesses marijuana goes to prison, while a CEO who steals billions from American taxpayers pays a nominal fine and a substantial campaign contribution and returns laughingly to the same criminal pursuit he was doing before. This is what routinely passes for justice in America. Two high-profile recent events kind of reflect the broken system. Eric Garner was a black man who was accused, he was accosted by 4 police officers for selling loose cigarettes on a New York street corner. He was summarily tried, convicted, and publicly executed in a matter of minutes. Now compare this to another event that happened on the streets of New York, Wall Street. Standard & Poor's credit rating paid a $1,375 million civil settlement to the Department of Justice for the crime of defrauding investors by issuing inflated ratings that hid the credit risk of residential mortgage-backed securities. They were supposed to be one of the gatekeepers. They were the ones that could have stopped this before it happened. But this was their hiding it was one of the chief causes of the 2008 financial crisis that cost the economy trillions of dollars and resulted in the loss of homes, jobs, and life savings for literally millions of people. Now, how can you have $1 billion worth of criminal fraud with no crime? There were no charges against Standard & Poor's, no charges against anyone else on Wall Street among all the robber barons who pocketed billions of dollars at the expense of taxpayers. No one prosecuted for pillaging the U.S. Treasury.
And what's interesting is that the Department of Justice originally wanted 6 times that amount as part of a settlement and decided, okay, we'll take 1/6 of what you actually caused in damages. So they get off basically free because a lot of places, when you look at J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, when they pull off these massive crimes and they defraud consumers of billions of dollars, they then pay millions in fines. They scammed you out of billions, and then they pay back millions. They not only not go to prison, they make a profit, and they don't have to give all of the money back. And that's one of the, I mean, that's almost as disgusting as nobody going to prison, is that they still keep the money that they stole. It's like somebody breaking into your home, stealing all of your belongings, getting caught by police and saying, all right, well, I'm going to give you one of your TVs back, and then we call it good.
And
this makes no sense.
Then we'll also give you a key to the house so you can go back in and do it again.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many more examples. What else? I mean, what else are these people getting away with?
The question is, why do we tolerate this? It's because we follow the golden rule of corporate America. He who has the goal makes the rules. We have wholly owned politicians of both parties who pay lip service to being tough on crime and equal justice under law, when in fact America imprisons more of our citizens than any other country in the world, while the corporate criminals enjoy the benefit of being in the upper 1% of wealth. Now, who's at fault for this? Mainly the enforcement agencies. The Department of Justice routinely settles corporate criminal cases with a fine of returning, as you say, a very small percentage. 1/6 is a pretty large recovery. 1/6 of what you steal is a pretty large recovery for the Department of Justice by their normal standards. They take a minimum nominal amount of money of what was stolen. They impose no criminal consequences and no incentives to repeat the crime. For example, if you look at the Education Mortgage Corporation, it's the second largest for-profit education company in the United States. They illegally paid recruiters to enroll students in violation of the False Claims Act. EDMC received $11 billion in payments, 90% by federal student loans and grants over an 8-year period. U.S. Department of Justice prosecuted and settled for $95 million, less than 1%. The DOJ did nothing for the students regarding student loans. They held no one individually accountable, no executive accountable. They required no admission of wrongdoing, which is important if the victims try to come in later and recover what they were defrauded out of. It's important that DOJ does not require an admission of wrongdoing. They did nothing to disqualify EDMC from coming right back and receiving federal funds in the future for doing the same thing. So this is how it works.
Well, and a lot of the things we've talked about today and in the past typically revolve around the financial crimes, because those are some of the more serious, some of the more publicized. But we're also dealing with corporations out there, mining companies, automobile companies, where the result is not just stealing from consumers, but the result is death of consumers, death of their workers. And, so everyone needs to understand, if you get stolen, get your income stolen from these companies, that is horrible. But when you look at what some of these other groups are doing, it could be a hell of a lot worse, because you may not even live to see the end of the day. I mean, GM's ignition switch failure, which is something, in my opinion, the media did not cover enough, even though they all talked about it, but they didn't go in depth enough. The fact that this ignition switch saved them maybe $2 per vehicle. $2. And people died because of it. To save $2 on your car, it cost you your life. You are worth less than $2 to General Motors.
There were 124 deaths, and so far 275 injuries have been acknowledged. And you have to understand, this didn't come about as a result of any work. This cover-up of years and years of lying and covering this up did not come about as a result of investigation by the Department of Justice. It came about as a result of a lawsuit brought by a plaintiff's lawyer who got into discovery and found all this wrongdoing, then took that to the Department of Justice. And what happens when you hear about a multi-billion-dollar recovery, a fine against big pharmaceutical companies, for example? It's not because any regulatory agency like the FDA went out and found that they were doing wrong. It's because plaintiffs' lawyers sued on behalf of injured plaintiffs. That you see the TV advertising all the time for if you had this pill, that pill, and so forth. That type of thing leads to big litigation, which leads to the finding of wrongdoing, a lot of discovery, review of millions of pages of documents, and then the discovery of fraud, wrongdoing, and criminal activity that results in death and serious injury. And then after the plaintiffs finish the MDL, the Department of Justice comes in and says, oh, by the way, why don't we pick up $1 billion based upon the work done by the plaintiffs' lawyers? So the regulatory agencies are completely failing. Even worse than that, the SEC, which is supposed to regulate this, they use their power to protect the corporate criminals because they have the power to give them waivers for collateral consequences. When the DOJ fines a corporation billions of dollars, or they settle for $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars, there also supposed to be other consequences, not being able to do business with the federal government in the future. The SEC comes in and waives that so that they can go right back to doing the same thing. So there's a complete failure of the regulatory agencies in this matter.
Well, that's why the work that you do, the work that Mike Papantonio does, and Michael Berg and David Haynes and everyone associated with the show, that's why it's so important. And Howard, I'm so grateful that we have people like you. We had just spoken, before we talked today about how much work you have to do in the coming months, and it's that work that helps to keep consumers safe. And I hope everyone watching this appreciates everything that you and Pap and everyone else does, because you're the ones out there every day working to keep America safe for consumers. So Howard, thank you for everything.
My pleasure, Farron.